Shalom lekulam. This week's Parsha is Parashat Noach, in which we encounter perhaps one of the most famous stories in the history of mankind. I'm referring, of course, to the story of Noach and the flood. The Torah tells us in the very beginning of the Parsha, Vatishachi haaretz lifnei ha'elokim, the earth was corrupt before God, Vatimale haaretz chamas, and the land was full of chamas. This word chamas in biblical Hebrew is a little bit ambiguous. Rashi, on the spot, tells us that it refers to gazel, to robbery, or to theft. The Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, explains that it refers to gezel and oshek, theft and taking advantage of those who were weak. In fact, the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Chet Amud Aleph, page 108a, as quoted by the Ramban, tells us, She'alav nitchatem gezar dinam. It was actually the sin of theft that was the straw that broke the camel's back. The people of that generation were guilty of many crimes, but it wasn't until they stooped to the level of stealing from one another that God determined that it was time to press the restart button and destroy the world. The question that I'd like to raise this morning is, what was exactly so terrible about the sin of theft that was the sin that brought about the destruction of the world? Question number one. Question number two is, how do we understand the magnitude of the punishment in relation to this sin? So the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, explains that this sin is twofold, or has two elements to it. It is a sin against God, and it's also a sin against man. In fact, it's a very basic sin against man that's logical and should be obvious to everyone, that it is immoral and incorrect to take something that does not belong to you. The Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah tells us a fascinating story. It says that the Midrash says that it was not simply that the people were stealing from one another, but in fact they were stealing from one another in a way for which they would not be held accountable by the court of law. You see, in order to receive a consequence or a punishment in court, a person needs to steal a minimum amount of a pruta, which was the smallest quantity of money in the ancient world. If a person stole less than a shave pruta, less than the value of a pruta, he in fact committed a crime, but he could not be punished by the court. So the Midrash tells us that if there were vendors, for example, in the street selling peas or other vegetables or fruits or clusters of grapes, let's say, people would come and steal one grape, for example, and since one grape is not the value of a pruta, they could not be brought to court, and they couldn't be required to pay back the value of what they stole. A person might think, well, what's the big deal? I'm only taking a small grape. It's harmless, it's insignificant, and it can't hurt anybody. But this is in fact a terrible mistake in judgment. Because if a vendor has a cluster of grapes with tens of grapes on them, maybe 30, 40 grapes on them, and 30 or 40 people come and each one takes just one grape, it's only a matter of minutes until the vendor has no merchandise left to sell. And so in fact this was the corruption of the generation, that they had deluded themselves into thinking that their actions were okay. They deluded themselves into thinking that their moral mistakes were in fact ethical and that their behavior and their conduct had no blemish in it. And this perhaps is why God decided to bring about a flood upon the earth. Because a society in which people commit such terrible crimes and have a complete lack of ethics and morality and somehow justify their actions is a society that is doomed to fail. Some of the commentators explain that the flood, the punishment of the flood, was mida keneged mida, measure for this crime of stealing such small quantities. Because when a person steals a very small quantity, he thinks to himself, what's the harm in stealing a tiny grape? I'm not in fact causing any damage to the vendor. Similarly, when the rain began to fall and the people saw little tiny drops falling from the heavens, they declared to themselves, what's the big deal? It's only a small shower outside. It's just a few drops outside. But just like all of those grapes combined together to form a cluster of grapes and cause great financial damage to the vendor, so too all of those drops of rain gathered together and formed the terrible flood that ultimately destroyed the world. This is perhaps one reason why God determined that a flood would be the vehicle of punishment to bring about the destruction of the corrupt and immoral people. I'd like to end with a brief idea focusing on the positivity of and the positive nature of this notion. And that is, if every small deed of ours can combine together to have great impact in the negative way, as it did in this story with Hamas, with theft, so too every small deed of ours that is a positive one can combine and join together and have a huge and tremendous positive impact. Sometimes a person does a mitzvah. Maybe they give charity, maybe they spend just a few minutes studying Torah, maybe they take a few minutes to recite Tehillim and pray on behalf of someone in need. Whatever it may be, a person could do a mitzvah and think to themselves, it's rather insignificant, I didn't accomplish too much. But that's in fact a terrible mistake, because every small mitzvah, just like every small avera, adds up. And a person should never think for just a moment that the tiniest good deed that he does, or fulfillment of a commandment, or act of kindness, or study of Torah doesn't matter. Because in fact, every single mitzvah that we does has tremendous significance and tremendous importance. This should be a cause for tremendous happiness and celebration. Every time we do a mitzvah, we could put on tefillin, we could light Shabbat candles, we can give a penny to charity, whatever it may be. Even a smile to someone in the street can be an action that has a tremendous impact on someone else's life and on our lives. I bless us, I wish for us, Bezrat Hashem, that we should take tremendous pride and happiness in every mitzvah that we do, and those mitzvot should bring tremendous nachat to Hashem and to us. Have a wonderful Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.